Hi, everyone. Heather here with PersephoneReturns.com. And today I am honored to have a very special guest here on my channel, my own personal doctor and very good friend, Dr. Matthew Buckley. Hi, Matt.
Hi there.
Hi. And so today we're doing something a little different. This is the first episode in my series of Uranus and Taurus Talks, where we're talking about or where we're interviewing people who are on the cutting edge of innovation in different fields related to Taurus and Uranus and Taurus. And these fields include food, nutrition, medicine, currency and cryptocurrencies, all of the things that have to do with, the energy of Taurus. And Dr. Buckley here is one of the I think best alternative doctors that exist right now. If I think about people who are on the cutting edge of sort of different alternative modalities of healing and things like that, I definitely think about Matt Buckley. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about a lot of different topics and how they sort of interrelate to one another. We're going to be talking about glyphosate or Roundup toxicity, GMOs, parasites, which is sort of an epidemic that's going on right now that most people are not aware of, and also how that relates to vaccines. And so how all of these things are sort of synergistically related. And before we get into this topic, I want to ask you just to explain a little bit about, who you are, what you do, and how you got into this line of work.
Okay. All right. So I am, I'm a chiropractor and kinesiologist. I've been practicing in Austin for about 15 years now. And I got into the field of healthcare because I had my own health problems. In my early 20s, late teens, I started to experience fatigue of an unknown cause, along with widespread aches and pains in my muscles. And eventually I ended up working my way through the conventional system to be told that I was depressed. I wouldn't accept that as the answer. I certainly was depressed because I wasn't feeling well, and it was clear that they didn't have an understanding of what was happening in my body. So I found my way into chiropractic school because chiropractic was one of the therapies that I found that actually gave my body a little bit of relief, along with some massage therapy. And I thought if anybody was going to figure it out, it was going to be me, or I was going to die. So I got into chiropractic school. I really didn't know that there was much variation within chiropractic. There's actually many different techniques and ways to view the body within chiropractic. I was an athlete, and I got exposed to muscle testing as a form of assessment very early on, and had an experience that demonstrated to me very, very clearly that there was something to this thing of using muscle testing as a form of assessment and correction within the body. And so as I started to work through that, I started to figure out that, I've actually got a lot of things happening within my body. I had a number of food sensitivities. I had a number of infections. I had metal toxicity. And all of those things that I had going on helped me to understand really what's going on with most people in terms of their body breakdown right now that's being given different labels. And so, my journey has been one to personally endure the struggles of chronic illness, and to have the insight through actually walking the walk to help to overcome it. So I've maintained that ultimately people, they don't really care what you do as long as you can help them. And so I've been very willing to step outside of the box and to go down some of these rabbit holes of alternative medicine. And some things are actually very, very good, and they're unfortunately very suppressed from the general population.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And I know firsthand you do use some techniques that are very unusual, even for me, who's very into alternative medicine, but they are highly effective. And you've gotten me into all sorts of stuff that has helped me very greatly, because I've had a path sort of similar to yours where I was very sick a few years ago. I started getting very sick when I had a series of transits that I won't go into, but it was a cascade effect, and everything just went bad all at once. And when we first met, I was slowly starting trying to, change my nutrition and pull myself out of that, but it wasn't working. And so you started introducing me into all sorts of different things. And since then, I'm able to be on this channel working, which I wouldn't have been able to do even 3 years ago. And so for that, I'm very grateful. And I can attest to the fact that Dr. Buckley's methods are valid. They do work, at least, in my experience. And so yeah, and a lot of the things that we have talked about have to do with parasites, Roundup, GMOs, things like vaccines. And so let's kind of launch into that topic. So let's start talking about the Roundup and the prevalence of glyphosate in the foods that we eat and what that does to the system.
Okay, well, I would say, if somebody's going to go down this path of trying to be well when they're dealing with a chronic health problem right now, to start eliminating things from their diet, maybe they'll eliminate some sugar. That's one of the first things that anybody should do when they're going down this path. Start eliminate sugar and just start cleaning up their diet a bit. And those are all important, but I see the biggest blind spot in terms of people actually making a turn is realizing this issue of Roundup toxicity. And really for the last 20 years, Roundup has been sprayed heavily upon our food supply. It's sprayed on the crops. And as a consequence of these staple crops such as corn and soy, they make it up through the food supply into the chicken, the beef, the pork, or any of the common foods that people are going to eat right now. And the significance of this is that the Roundup residue that gets on that food is the base molecule of that is a patented antibiotic, and it alters the gut ecology to become dominant in the wrong strains of bacteria. And so as your body becomes dominant in these wrong strains of bacteria, your defenses go down because your gut is effectively your immune system. 80% of your immune system is found within your digestive system. So if it was just that alone, that would be a bad enough issue. But the fact is that the Roundup ingredients, glyphosate being the base molecule within there, glyphosate is considered to be a glycine analog. Glycine is an important amino acid in your body.
Yeah.
So anywhere that glycine is meant to be used within your body could be disrupted potentially from glyphosate. So you're looking at a lot of low-level dysfunction that will emerge just from that alone. So what I see ultimately is that people are dealing with this hit that's affecting their body, increasing their toxic body burden in a very significant way, because it's not only affecting your gut's ability to detoxify, it's affecting your thyroid, it's affecting your adrenal hormones, it's affecting your thyroid hormones. I got to say, I'm quite certain that in the not too distant future, people will look at the issue of Roundup toxicity in a much greater, view of environmental disasters that we've done upon the population, much more so than DDT ever was.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of people don't understand that it is a patented antibiotic. And not only is it killing our gut flora, but it's killing the microbiome of the soil. And so we're literally killing the soil from which we grow our food as well, which is creating nutritional deficiencies in the food we eat. So it's a huge problem on all levels, on an environmental level and on a personal individual level. So yeah, that's very interesting that you bring that up. And so what would you recommend that people do, first and foremost, to try to avoid this glyphosate exposure? Because it's everywhere, right? It's like you can just walk down the street and people are spraying it just all willy-nilly, and it's very difficult to avoid, even when you're eating a clean, healthy diet.
Well, right. So, it's a water-soluble molecule, and your municipal water supply is not actually filtering it out. If you look at a map of glyphosate application in the U.S., you'll see that it's really heavy in the Midwest, throughout the Midwest. And if you look at cancer, the rates of cancer throughout the United States, you'll see a distribution that if you were to examine the the issue of the glyphosate from the standpoint, well, it's water soluble, so it's actually going to run downstream. You'll notice that the highest cluster of cancer in the United States is in Louisiana, right where the Mississippi is at. So the glyphosate's getting up into our water supply. Our rainwater is actually contaminated. Your drinking water is almost certainly going to be contaminated with it as well. So having a shower filter is essential, but there's an ingredient or a mineral formulation that's derived from peat moss called humic acid, and humic acid. There's a few different products that are on the market that, if you look, you'll find that humic acid is effective at helping to chelate out a Roundup, or at least glyphosate. There's actually a few other molecules within Roundup, but in my personal opinion is that I believe that supplementing with a good humic acid based product is probably one of the most important things that anybody could do right now. Because if you're trying to get your gut healthy, you're going to have a lot of trouble doing it if you've got Roundup toxicity there, and most people have it.
Absolutely. Okay. So that's that's very important and very good to know. And that's something that you can just, pick up on Amazon or, sometimes even your local health food store. So if people want a relatively inexpensive and easy way to sort of start to heal themselves and detox from the glyphosate, that's a really, awesome tip there that you just gave us. And so it is really difficult to avoid. And so explain how Roundup toxicity and like the disruption to the gut flora and all these other things, how this relates to another big major problem and epidemic that we have right now, which is parasites, which people don't realize even in first world countries like the United States, many people have parasites, especially if they keep pets in the home and especially if they sleep with those pets. So, yeah.
Right. So, I see a lot of people who have chronic illness, and one of the biggest drivers of their symptomatology tends to come from the fact that they have parasites. And the unfortunate reality is that conventional medicine in terms of identifying parasites is abysmally poor. There's good books written by Dr. Simon Yu, who's a medical doctor who he's written a book called The Accidental Cure, and he talks about how poor conventional testing is and why he uses alternative methods for assessing parasites. I've seen the same thing in my practice, and most of the doctors that have been doing this long enough and are honest in what they're doing will tell you that parasites and parasitic testing is very, very poor. So people are being misled with regard to the conventional testing that's out there. So with regard to the Roundup and how it will affect the body, it'll affect some basic molecules within the body, which end up impairing the immune system's ability to respond to parasites, for one. But secondly, the fact that your microbiome is being disrupted by the Roundup to begin with, to become dominant in the Clostridia strains of bacteria, because that's what the research shows, is that the Clostridia strains of bacteria are immune to the Roundup.
Mm.
So they become dominant. So people are like, well, what are Clostridia strains of bacteria? Clostridia is a class of microbes that would include something called Clostridium botulinum, which is where Botox is derived from. C. diff, people probably have heard of that too. C. diff is a common infection that's found within hospitals that causes severe diarrhea oftentimes. But you can get these low levels of these microbes that exist in your body, and they're creating these chemical factories that slowly poison you. It's not to such a degree that it's going to be obviously apparent on a test, a conventional test, but in a subtle way, things are being altered in such a way that it is impacting you on a functional level that leads to these sorts of problems. So that's ultimately how I see how the Roundup is playing into the equation of the parasites. On top of the fact that it, if it's affecting the thyroid, and we know that it can, if it's affecting heme, We know that it can affect the thyroid, and if it affects the thyroid, then your base metabolic activity goes down, which means your immune system function goes down as well. And this is an important point to also bring up here relative to testing. So when people go into a lab and they have their blood work done, and they take the results of that, back to their medical doctor, and the medical doctor says, hey, everything's normal. What normal really means is that for that lab, between 100 to 200 people go into that lab and they have their blood drawn, and they're looking at a particular value. And they're going to create a bell curve of whatever unit that they're looking at, and they're going to cut off the upper 5% and the lower 5%. And as long as you fall within that range, you're going to be told that you're normal. But the reality of the situation is that the majority of people that are going to get the blood work done are healthy to begin with. Mm-hmm. It's not really comparing yourself to healthy people. You're comparing yourself to sick people. And so a true normal, which I think most people would, common people would say, well, what shouldn't normal actually be what's actually close to healthy? So a normal range is going to be much more narrowly defined. So people from that standpoint alone are being misled.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's like an epidemic of people who have endocrine issues from the glyphosate, and also immune system issues, gut flora issues. And then we're doing the blood work on these people that are probably also nutritionally deficient because their gut flora is all messed up and they're not eating right anyway. And then that's what's being deemed as normal, because in our society it is normal, and that's not necessarily healthy. So, so what would you recommend that people do in terms of testing to figure these things out? Like, how would they be able to sort of navigate that realm?
Find a good practitioner. You're going to have to ask around and find a good practitioner. I'm certainly not on here soliciting business. I can hardly keep up with what I've got. I think the best thing to do is really to ask around and see if you can find somebody that has had success. That's familiar with the issue of parasites, because this parasitic issue is such a big issue that if a doctor is really neglecting this, is it kind of, no, it's a huge problem. And any doctor that kind of dismisses it, in my view, is really not qualified to be dealing with people that have chronic illness right now.
Absolutely. And so for people who are experiencing chronic illness or strange symptoms that they're not able to necessarily find a diagnosis or any sort of solution for in conventional medicine, explain what the symptoms are like for people who have, or the most common symptoms, because I know they can vary from person to person when they do experience a parasitic infection, and what that looks like, what they should be asking for in terms of testing and all of that kind of stuff.
Any gastrointestinal problem should be viewed as a potential parasitic problem. And so that's number one. Sleep problems are right towards the top as well. I mean, parasites will affect GABA signaling in the nervous system, and GABA is the primary inhibitory, the calming neurotransmitter in your body, which allows you to maintain sleep. Melatonin allows you to fall asleep, but it's actually GABA that allows you to maintain sleep. Mm-hmm. When you have issues with parasites, it tends to affect the signaling, and so you have this disruption within your sleep. More common symptoms that are also associated with parasites are grinding of the teeth. These symptoms tend to be worsened and exacerbated right around the new and the full moon. I tend to notice that things tend to pop up about 3 days prior to each one of those, and they'll become the worst maybe a day or two after if the parasites aren't addressed.
Absolutely. And that's something that I have noticed as well. I know every single time if I'm feeling sick or having disruptive sleep, like just before the new and the full moon, or any time around that time, I always know it's parasites, and I'll come to you and I'll be like, Dr. Buckley, which parasites do I have this month? And it almost always is parasites. So that's pretty spot on. So like paying attention to the lunar cycles and how your body's reacting to the new and full moon, because a lot of people think that there's this big cosmic energy that's causing them to lose sleep during the full moon. And there have been studies that have shown that people sleep less during the full moon than they do during the other phases of the moon. And that might actually be because a lot of us have parasites, right? And so we're looking at like, oh, it's the cosmos. And I mean, it is, but there's actually a physiological reason for this.
Right.
And so yeah, and that kind of lends a little bit more credence to astrology in general, because it does, the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the sun, and the cycles of the planets do actually affect life here on Earth in the way that especially the way that we reproduce, the cycles of the moon. But yeah, so anyway, so looking for, those types of symptoms and, gastrointestinal issues and sleep disruption, grinding your teeth. If somebody has these types of issues, but they're not able to find a good practitioner like yourself, and you do work with people, I know, remotely. I know you have a busy workload, but if somebody's really inclined, they might be able to contact you. But if they're not able to do that, what would you recommend? Is there some sort of protocol that they could use that's safe and that could be effective for most, or at least some of the more common intestinal parasites?
Sure. I find that diatomaceous earth and clove would be a good thing for people to start out with.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any tendencies towards to constipation, there's a good chance that you have Ascaris, lumbricoides parasites. That parasite will secrete morphine analogs, and if you've ever taken an opiate, which commonly prescribed for like pain following surgery or something, then you'll notice that your intestines tend to lock up and you just don't really go. And so these Ascaris parasites secrete this morphine analog, and it'll tend to cause paralysis within the intestines. Constipation is a big issue. Cape aloe is very effective at helping to, mobilize the intestines, but at the same time, it's an antiparasitic that works well on the Ascaris parasite. So those are two things that you could easily use. I find that what's not really known very well is not widely used, but porcelain extract is probably the best, broadest antiparasitic that there is. So I commonly use a lot of porcelain extract.
Absolutely. And purslane, you can get that actually from like bulk supplements on Amazon, and it's pretty gross to take. If you can get it, if you can encapsulate it yourself, that's usually the best way to do it. It's kind of sticky and has a funny taste.
I don't think it tastes that bad. I had a patient come in yesterday, and they're saying, I kind of like that taste.
Really? I find it to be really gross, but I'll take it back anyway. To at the new and the full moon or whatever. But yeah, so those are three really good, and those are relatively safe. A lot of these have a lot of nutritional value, outside of just being, antiparasitic too, like purslane and, Cape aloe and those types of things. And clove oil is good for you for a number of reasons. So, even if you don't have parasites, you're probably not doing any harm. You might actually be enhancing something if you take these products. All right, cool. So, so we talked about Roundup toxicity. We talked about parasites. The other topic that we wanted to get into a little bit was how vaccines play a role in creating the conditions that cause chronic illness.
Yeah. Okay. So, situation is that our gut microbiome is dysfunctional for a number of reasons. Roundup being one of the biggest, in my opinion. So your defenses are down in that way. And so chronic infections tend to emerge within our bodies from that. You get permeability issues within the gut, which allows for, we call it translocation, the migration of the microbes from your digestive system into the bloodstream. Our research shows that an infection anywhere within the periphery of the body will induce an inflammatory response in the nervous system. Okay, so if you're looking at any of the neurodegenerative conditions that are out there, whether you're talking about Parkinson's, you're talking about Alzheimer's disease, autism, ALS, non-situational depression, non-situational anxiety, those are all inflammatory issues. And when you're looking at these inflammatory issues or these issues that are affecting the nervous system, you're looking at largely the expression of something called glutamate. glutamate's the body's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. When when your immune cells go into a pro-inflammatory state in the nervous system, the microglia, they secrete large amounts of glutamate. When that happens persistently within the hippocampus, you're going to be developing Alzheimer's disease. When it occurs in the basal ganglia, you're going to eventually be told that you have Parkinson's disease. Okay. If it occurs in the frontal lobe of the brain, you could be told that you have depression. So the significance of the vaccines is that most people are dealing with this low level persistent inflammatory response within the body. And vaccines are pro-inflammatory agents. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the way that I view the autism epidemic is a situation where these children are being brought into the world and their microbiome is disrupted because they have a heavy toxic body burden to begin with. Mom was probably not the most healthy woman in the world. Maybe she wasn't too heavily toxic, but for whatever reason, that child just couldn't metabolize some of the ingredients in the vaccine very well, and it ignited an inflammatory response severely. But for sure, when you give a vaccine, you're going to use it's going to upregulate pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are going to promote those immune cells, which may already exist in a pro-inflammatory state, to go hyper-inflammatory. And it's also possible that they induce infectious agents into the system as well, that also cause the inflammation to remain persistent in a high intensity state. And so I really view the vaccine issue to be gasoline to a smoldering fire upon the issue of a high toxic body burden, particularly one that's been doused with Roundup.
Okay, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So we're taking these children, sometimes these adults who already have a lot of inflammatory issues, a lot of issues with their gut flora, with parasites, all these different infections, and then we're increasing the inflammation through the vaccination, which is exacerbating all the problems, if not causing, new problems. And so that's one of the things that people don't realize when we talk about this vaccine debate. Whether or not vaccines are effective, whether or not they're safe, all of these different things, the vaccines inherently cause this inflammatory response, right? So that's not necessarily going to be good for somebody who's not already healthy. So yeah, that's really important to make note of and to understand. And so if you have been sort of heavily vaccinated and you're having a lot of these issues, I'm going to ask you again for what you think would be a good starting point in terms of a solution. Obviously, reducing Roundup toxicity and all the toxic load and burden, getting rid of the infections and all of that. But what are some other things that people can do on a day-to-day basis to start to relieve this burden on their system so they can start to get some sort of, feeling of relief?
Well, don't get vaccinated. I mean, that's the most important thing that anybody can do as far as that goes. But if you are in that pro-inflammatory state, there's different things you can do to take that might modulate the immune system's inflammation to some degree. But really, if there's these chronic infections that are in there and you're dealing with persistent anxiety, if you're dealing with persistent anxiety, non-situational depression, you've got an inflammatory issue going on. And one of the best supplements, if you're going to look at it from a supplement, what can I take from a supplement standpoint? L-theanine would be one of the best supplements that I think that anybody could take. Magnesium is also hugely important because that'll also help to dampen the glutamate reactivity in the nervous system. But I gotta say, in terms of calming inflammation in a significant way and doing it quickly, based off of what I've experienced and seen. Something called frequency-specific microcurrent is really one of the best tools that's out there for helping to calm an inflammatory response and help to deal with those problems.
Absolutely. And you've used the microcurrent device on me multiple times in your office. And I always would come in with all this inflammation. And when I get inflammation, I see a lot more floaters in my vision, which is something I already deal with because of retina issues. And every time I leave your office and within a few hours, those floaters go away and I start to feel really drowsy, but also a sense of relief. So by the following day, I'm usually back to my normal self, at least somewhat. So I mean, yeah, it's absolutely works. And that's something I would love to have you back on, if you would, to talk about is, these frequency technologies that are being used for healing in this day and age, because that's very much a Uranus and Taurus thing, right? Taurus is the body, Uranus is electricity. So we have on one end of the spectrum, things like, EMFs and all of these different, electrical currents and waves and things that we're being bombarded with on a day-to-day basis. So that's something that's kind of going on right now, but you can also use frequencies for healing. And so that's something that I think people might be interested in sort of learning a little bit more about in the future.
Yeah, gotcha.
Awesome. All right. So is there any final thoughts that you want to give or anything that you want to sort of say in the lines of, the connections between all of these different illnesses and what people can do to sort of pull themselves out of it and, all that kind of stuff?
So I view the problem as it's really like it's a three-legged stool. And a three-legged stool to driving chronic illness right now. Main three-legged stool of people that are, moderately health conscious, but they're probably ignoring, right? It's the Roundup toxicity, it's the vaccines, and it's the EMF. The issue of the electromagnetic radiation is something that people just kind of like dismiss it because we're all addicted to our technology. But the fact of the matter is that those frequencies that are being emitted, they're biologically active, they're affecting our bodies. And one of the things that it's doing is that it will induce inflammation in the body. So if you look at the situation of the Roundup altering the gut ecology, which is helping to fuel these chronic low-grade infections, all of which can be exacerbated by the fact that maybe you get hit with a major pro-inflammatory event such as a vaccine. And then you're smothered in a sea of electromagnetic smog, which can amplify the effects of all of that. And it's really kind of daunting to think about the sort of problem that we're allowing ourselves to go down and create for ourselves out of convenience.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that people should be mindful of the fact that your wireless router that you have in your house is microwaving you, and it's not promoting your health. So at a minimum, I would say turn that off at night. And as far as like your cell phone, don't ever hold it up against your head.
Yeah.
Use your speakerphone whenever you can. When you hold that cell phone up against your head, it's creating enough microwave radiation that's actually opening up your blood-brain barrier. So these microbes that you have perhaps seeping from your leaky gut into your bloodstream and coursing around your blood, it's going to have a way to actually access the nervous system and perhaps create a home in there. And then you're going to have real problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've even seen like sort of in the mainstream media, these like brain imaging maps where someone holds a cell phone up to their head and all of a sudden it's like bright red and just like, super hot. And so, I mean, that has more to do, I think, with like heat and different things like that, but there's still something going on there, right? And they've already linked cell phone use with, things like brain cancer and brain tumors and things like that. So it does make sense that you wouldn't want to be holding this up to your face, even though people nowadays, they have these Bluetooth collars and Bluetooth headsets and they have a phone on their side and like, they're just covered in like Wi-Fi and, radiation. But that's, that's not necessarily convenience. It's convenient now. It's going to be inconvenient later when you get really sick from it, right?
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I think is kind of interesting about this that you explained to me kind of a while back was the influence of the EMFs and like the Wi-Fi and all of that on I think it was like your melatonin production and your circadian rhythms. Is that right?
Yep.
So explain that a little bit, because a lot of people have sleep issues, not just from parasites, right? There's a lot of different stuff going on here that's causing this, but most people that I know have trouble, at least to a certain extent, with sleep. And so having this Wi-Fi on while you're sleeping and your phone next to your head and all of that, that's not good, right? So explain to us why.
Well, your body's premier antioxidant is actually melatonin. And so the electromagnetic radiation that we're being exposed to is creating compounds that are pro-oxidants, and our body has to deal with those pro-oxidants by producing antioxidants. And so melatonin helps in that regard to do that. Melatonin is important in terms of activating a key gene called NRF2, and NRF2 will also produce a chemical called glutathione, which is important for detoxifying any number of things within our body. So once the melatonin levels become suppressed, then you don't detoxify well, which means that all these environmental toxins that you're hit with aren't able to leave your body quite as well, which means that your immune system doesn't work quite as well, which means you're going to be more prone to a pro-inflammatory state. And so you can see how all this stuff can kind of cycle upon itself to cause more and more problems.
Mm-hmm.
So.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And so it's like, and it's not something that you necessarily have that just comes on all at once either. It slowly grows and builds and builds and builds over time until, the way that you're living is no longer tolerable because you feel so crappy all the time, right? And that's something that many, many people have experienced and are experiencing right now. And so, yeah, this is really valuable and really important information, I believe, because it's really important to reduce the exposure to all these things as much as possible and do what you can to, remedy these problems as much as you can, because you really can't fully escape from all of it. Even, living in a rural area like where I live right now, I still have like 10 Wi-Fi signals like all around me, right? And there's a cell phone tower somewhere. So it's really impossible to escape unless you're in like a cave, hiding out from the world. So yeah, it is a little hard, but there are things we can do. Like turning off the Wi-Fi at night and taking different supplements and eating healthy and avoiding the glyphosate, all of that. All right. So, yeah. So do you have any like final thoughts? Like, what would you recommend that people do as the very first step? So if they're watching this video and they are super just feeling crappy, unhealthy, they don't know what to do, they don't know where to start, where is a good starting point?
Well, the first thing that I would say that, if you're just going to go down this path of trying to get healthy, you've not done anything, right? You've really done no research into any of this stuff. I mean, the most important thing that anybody could do would be to cut out the sugar.
Okay.
Cut out the sugar. That includes the sodas.
Yeah.
Eliminate your processed food. Yeah, that's the starting point for everybody.
Okay, so just starting to clean up your diet and all of that. All right, cool. Well, so do you have any final thoughts?
No, just try and become aware and educate yourself as much as possible about this stuff, and help spread the word, because the issue around toxicity is such a big deal that I really truly feel like the ability for us to survive as life on the planet really depends upon getting this problem solved.
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. And so if people want to, check out Matt Buckley's work or get in contact with him, his website is kinseymindbody.com. And is that the best way to probably find you and contact you?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. And hopefully we'll see you again.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, bye.